Hi BookTube and welcome to a new video. This is a weekly wrap up or a Friday reads for 4 books. Old Baggage by Lissa Evans. Julian Fuks, Resistance, an author who is of Argentinian extract but is Brazilian. Death and the Penguin by Andrey Kurkov, who is Ukrainian. And Such Small Hands by Barba, book from Spain. So I'm going to start with Old Baggage by Lissa Evans, and what a delightful read this was too. So it's a story about a suffragette called Matty, and it's 10 years after the suffragette campaign seemed to have wrought its success and established votes for women in 1919. And all the suffragettes that she was with, they've sort of dispersed and gone down different routes. It's like, well, you know, they achieved the one cause that they were fighting for, and they've gone on to sort of, you know, relive and sort of populate their lives. So some have gone off to get married, one's managed to get a sort of a job in a profession, which is still rare then. One has become an alcoholic, one has gone off to Australia, married a man there and come back and is looking to promote fascism, pride in your country. But, you know, Matty is still looking to fight. She's still looking to resist. She knows that although they've got the vote, that, you know, women are still second class citizens. The fact that one of her suffragette comrades or sisters, you know, has got a job in a profession is quite unusual. But Matty, you know, has to have an outlet for all this sort of pent-up energy. You know, there isn't the cause where they go marching and chaining themselves to railings and getting arrested and beaten up by the police. You know, that doesn't exist anymore. That infrastructure of resistance isn't there. So what she hits on is she sort of sets up a group where she's a mentor to young girls to give them a sort of a chance to sort of develop and blossom and find themselves. And this group's called the Amazons. And the story is that, you know, they're definitely blossoming and blooming, but Maddie makes a very, very bad judgment call and you know, manages to destroy the whole thing. Ashes destroyed virtually every relationship in her life. And that's basically what the book is. There's a lot of politics, but there's a lot about the politics of the personal relationships and the relationships with these girls that she's mentoring. There are 2 in particular. One is a young working class girl who she sort of takes on to be her cleaner, her daily cleaner. But she's full of potential and she's really blossoming under this mentorship. The other is a girl who Matty discovers that she has a personal relationship to, which I won't spoil. And you know, she keeps sort of, you know, she breaks off the focus on the other girl to really focus on this girl. But this girl gives her nothing back. There's just nothing there. So again, that's an example of like her bad judgment. But, you know, this book has an awful lot going for it, an awful lot about the politics, an awful lot about the role of women in that sort of interwar society. But a delightful study of, you know, just people. And the character of Matty, she's acerbic, she's bright, she's witty. I mean, she's a fantastic hostess to convey us through this novel. And I love this book. It was just so utterly charming. You know, 5 stars. I've already ordered another Lissa Evans book, which I think, again, is either set around between the wars or during the Second World War. Not exactly sure. So I'm curious to see how that is, because, you know, she has an effortless, delightful, amusing style. And it'd be interesting to see if you know, that's in this next book that I've ordered of hers. And still on the theme of resistance, this is Julian Fuks, actually called Resistance. So this is about a family in Argentina during the time of the generals ruling the country and what was called the disappeared, where people would literally disappear off the streets, never to be seen again, sort of political opponents or whatever. And the mother and father are both psychotherapists. But they're having trouble conceiving, so they also put down for adoption, and they adopt a boy, and then soon after they manage to conceive and have a boy and a girl of their own. So it's a family of 5 people. But the adopted son, you know, he never feels, you know, part of the family. He's aware of his difference, and I think the cleverness of this book is, the parents are on the left, they're in opposition to the generals, so they are showing resistance in whatever form that may be. The father is sort of hiding guns for the cause, that kind of thing. But right under their nose, this adopted son is resisting them, trying to, draw their attention through his sort of passive, aggressive resistance to them. And even though they're psychotherapists, they don't really know what to do, and they're not really aware of how best to treat him. And I have a theory that psychotherapists should never be allowed to bring children into the world because they'd be the worst parents. But anyway, and it's just, it's told from the viewpoint of the younger brother, who is blood related to the parents, trying to construct the character of his older brother, trying to get to grips with, what he was about, what it says about the whole family, his parents. He's trying to put all this together, and in the end, they are forced to flee Argentina, and they take up residence in Brazil. And that's pretty much what this book is. So there's some really good sort of observations and some sort of quite chilling sort of themes. So, for example, one of the things that the generals did is they disappeared about 400, 500 babies and young children, and they gave them, they basically have sort of forced adoption for their cronies, for childless couples who were part of the regime or friends of the regime. And there was a movement called Les Madres de la Plaza Mayo, who were the grandmothers who were looking to, find their grandchildren who'd been stolen from them. And of course that sets the younger son thinking, well, we know who the mother was, or we know who we've been told his brother's mother was, who was a sort of impoverished Italian petite woman, but we're not part of the regime, so we can't have been chosen to have this adoption, stolen from somebody else. We can't be, because we're in opposition to the regime. But it still gets him thinking that, this is all a bit, kind of creepy. What if it is somehow? What if his parents were initially on the side of the regime or whatever? So it's it's about 30 chapters, 3-4 pages long. So it's very sort of rapid fire, episodic, but memory. And as I say, there's some really good stuff in here, but also there's some stuff that just sort of, doesn't quite rise to the same level. So it's a bit hit or miss in parts, this book. So I gave it 4 stars. On to Death and the Penguin by Andrey Kurkov. And, this was a great sort of, what's the word? Deadpan read. So it's set in Kiev, soon after Ukraine has had its independence from Russia. And the social setting is that, there is still corruption and violence around. The question is it the sort of the old same communists in power with their sort of state security services? Or is it a new sort of generation of gangsters who just basically have taken over those security, employed the same guys used to be in the secret services, doing surveillance and stuff? And the main character here is a sort of eternal bachelor, very lonely, very miserable. But he has a companion, which is a king-sized penguin that he keeps in his flat, because the Ukraine zoo, the Kiev zoo, sort of ran out of money and started selling off its animals to the highest bidders. Although obviously animals like lions and tigers are still in the zoo because you can't keep them in your flat. So they seem to mirror one another. This character and his penguin. They're very, they're very sort of lonely and sort of miserable. The character is a writer. He has these dreams of writing novels and short stories, but he never really gets it together. But what he does get is he gets a job writing obituaries for various people in Kiev. And of course you write these well ahead of time. And he is encouraged to sort of, go a bit sort of full-on surreal, philosophical about death and life lived and all of that stuff. As long as he also includes the notes that are underlined in red that he's given on each of these personalities. And of course he's frustrated because although he's a writer and he's knocking these things out, he's unpublished until one of them dies. He's not published. And eventually one of his dies, and it seems to change everything, because then more people start dying and more people come into his life. So the first character that comes into his life is that a guy wants to hire him as a freelance writer of obituaries, which is a bit of an odd concept. And then one day he comes to him with his young daughter saying, look, my life's in danger. You need to look after this girl and I'll kill you if anything happens to her. So all of a sudden the writer now has this young girl. So to cope with that, he hires a nanny who's the daughter of a friend, the only friend he has. She's 19 years old, and they the daughter, the nanny and the daughter hit it off like wildfire. So that all seems to be going well. So it's this odd family of four of the writer, the penguin, the nanny, and the young girl. And increasingly, there's a sort of menace and threat of, people are dying are somehow linked back to his obituaries, but he can't quite put his finger on it. So what's really sort of satisfying about this book is you've got this sort of twin track of the social stuff, the social satire of corruption and death and presumably assassinations. But then you've also got the odd goings on of this odd family of four, including the penguin. So just to give you an example of the the sort of touching personal stuff is one day he comes back with 3 live carp because he thinks his penguin would would appreciate a live fish treat rather than the frozen fish that he always gives him, and he puts his carp in the bath to keep them alive, and the penguin can help himself. So the penguin sort of waddles in, sees his carp in the bath, and then seems completely sad and depressed by the whole prospect, and the author can't understand why. And the reason is why is because the bath is the penguin's most cherished place in the flat, because he can have cold baths and sort of that's his one sort of link back to where he's from is cold water, and he's been usurped by these carp. And in the end, the author ends up eating cooking and eating the carp with another human being. It's not the penguin who gets to benefit. So there's lots of really nice stuff like that going on, and it's a very satisfying ending, which I will not spoil for you. And it's just all round, the deadpan tone really suits it. So this was a highly enjoyable, easygoing read, but still sort of had sort of punches that could make you stop up short. And it's a terrific book. I think I gave this 4.5 stars. And finally on to Such Small Hands by Andrey Barba, which I've given 4 stars, but I'm prepared to change that because I'm going to let this sort of sit and see if it continues to sort of play on me and I keep thinking about it, because I'm not sure what to make of it. So there's a girl in the back of a car driven by her parents. The car goes out of control, crashes, both parents die, and she, her ribs are exposed and she has this sort of massive scar. And her only emotional reaction is that one of her parents died immediately, the other died on reaching hospital. That's all she ever says, like a mantra. And she's having sort of psychological support to get her through the trauma. But she will end up inevitably in an orphanage because she has no parents and no relatives. So she goes to this orphanage when she's sort of healed physically. And she's different because the first time she's in the group showers, the girls notice this massive scar. She's not this sort of pristine, perfectly sort of formed young girl. She has this sort of horrible scar, which sets her apart. Also, she's apart class-wise because she's obviously from a much richer class than these sort of abandoned kids, girls who've ended up in the orphanage. And the bulk of the book is the relationship between her and the group. So it's a book about devotion, love, adoration. It's also about hatred. And it's these children, very young children, who have not sort of, they don't have parents to give them the primary experience of bonding. So they have to kind of figure it out for themselves. And that's why it veers from sort of love and devotion and adoration into violence as well. Because they don't have this sort of, they don't have the guidance of adults, really. And there's lots of quite startling images in it. There's a really fantastic one where a parade of caterpillars are sort of marching across outside in the dust. And the girl decides, I'm going to think of a number, and whatever number that is, I'm going to kill that caterpillar in the column. And she says 4. So she goes to the column, kills the 4th caterpillar. And all the other caterpillars stop and they sort of come round to see what's happened. They form a circle. By which point all the girls in the playground around have formed a circle around the girl. So these sort of concentric circles. And it's a brilliant and a simple image, and also an example of the violence. So it is quite affecting. And I think it's a good attempt at sort of showing us how children's minds, while they're still forming, still trying to sort of conceive, what is the difference between love, adoration, devotion. Um, it's good in that respect, but I'm not sure that it quite got anywhere in the end. So that's why I'm going to sort of let it rest and see if if the ideas and images sort of keep sort of playing on my mind when I've finished it. I've moved on to something else. It is an interesting read. I think part of the problem is it's so short. It sort of approximates or aspires to sort of do some quite uh, intellectual, important observations about human development, about children, about the imaginative world of children, all that stuff. But it's so slight. I'm not sure it can carry the weight of that, which may be unfair. I don't know. Some people will say, no, it's just a sort of slightly creepy supernatural book to me, which it isn't at all. It's serious literary fiction. So there you have it, the 4 books that I read this week, and that means I read them instead of my March of the Mammoths, The Infinite Jest, because I've come to a decision on that. I'm about a quarter of the way through, and the March of the Mammoths has been really good for me to plunge into that book to get it started. But it was proving too difficult to only do sort of 17 pages or no, about 27 pages a day. I've read these 4 books in 6 days. I don't know how many pages they total to. So what I've decided is what I suggested in my initial March of the Mammoths videos. I'm going to read 20 pages a week between now and the end of the year. And then by then I should have finished The Infinite Jest. And I think that's the way for me to do it, because I was getting very frustrated at not being able to read in parallel with it, because it was also so all-consuming in terms of my limited reading time was on Infinite Jest, but I was only getting 30 pages a day, which is about half of my normal rate. So I didn't get the sense that I was achieving anything in my reading. So I'm going to read that slowly throughout the year, and I think that would be the best way for me to make it work. Okay, so there you have it. Thanks very much. Till next time.